Okay, let's just dive right into this one. Was Cain, the first murderer in the Bible, literally the son of Satan? I know it sounds completely bizarre, right? Like something straight out of a horror movie. But this is an idea that has been around for centuries, and it all kicks off with one single, kind of ambiguous line from the New Testament.
And here it is, 1 John 3, verse 12. The phrase that launches this whole wild theory is right there. Who was of the evil one. Now look, most people read that and think, okay, it's a metaphor. Cain's actions were evil. He was on the side of evil. But some people have taken it in a much more literal, biological sense. And once you start thinking that way, it leads to this really startling claim. It makes people look all the way back to the very first book of the Bible, Genesis, and ask a pretty shocking question. Is the story of the first family way, way darker than we've ever been told? So, does it? Does the Old Testament actually back this up? Well, if you just read it, not at all. In fact, Genesis 4:1 seems to say the complete opposite. Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain. Seems pretty open and shut, right? But the people who believe this theory claim there are hidden clues in the text.
All right, so for a minute, let's actually look at the case for this theory. To build their argument, its supporters have to dig really deep into the original Hebrew, and they start looking for little quirks and anomalies that they say prove their point. So check this out. On the left, you've got Cain's birth. On the right, his younger brother Seth's birth. See the difference? The Bible makes a point of saying that Seth was in Adam's likeness and image, but it never says that about Cain. And proponents of the theory jump on this. It's what's called an argument from silence. They say, well, if Cain wasn't in Adam's image, then he must not have been Adam's son at all. And then there's this other piece they point to. There's some genuinely awkward grammar in the original Hebrew of that verse about Cain's birth. A super literal translation has Eve saying something like, she has gotten a man with the Lord. It's a really weird phrase, and translators have kind of scratched their heads over it for centuries. And it's exactly this kind of confusion that leaves the door open for some really, really unusual interpretations. So you've got these couple of supposed clues, but here's where the whole thing just hits a brick wall. This is the crucial turning point. Despite those weird little bits in the text, for more than 1,000 years, absolutely no one, not a single Jewish or Christian scholar, ever interpreted these verses to mean Cain was Satan's biological son. There's just complete silence on the idea. And this timeline just puts it all into perspective. The book of Genesis was pretty much finalized around 500 BC. The New Testament, where our original quote comes from, was written centuries later. But the very first time this idea of Cain being Satan's son appears in writing is in the 7th or 8th century AD. That is a gap of at least 1,200 years. So this idea isn't some ancient hidden truth. It's a medieval invention. So if it wasn't there from the beginning, where did it come from? How was it invented? Well, believe it or not, we can actually pinpoint the exact moment. It wasn't discovered in the Bible. It was inserted into a later text that was pretending to be just a translation. And here it is. This is the smoking gun. On the left, you have the original, simple text from Genesis. On the right, you have the so-called translation from this text called the Targum Pseudo-Jonathan. Just look at what the author did. He added a complete bombshell, who had conceived from Samael, the angel of the Lord. Samael, by the way, is a name used for a Satan-like figure in some Jewish traditions. This isn't translation, this is a total rewrite. He literally invented a sexual encounter between Eve and Satan and just stuck it in the text. Now, you might be wondering, what on earth is a Targum? Well, basically, it's an ancient Aramaic paraphrase of the Old Testament. And while a lot of them are pretty faithful, this specific one, Pseudo-Jonathan, is kind of infamous among scholars. It's known for going way beyond translation, with the author just freely inserting his own theological opinions and ideas right into the text, as if they were part of the original scripture all along. Okay, so now that we know where this idea was actually invented, we can go back and look at those original clues and see what the Bible was really getting at. And the key is this: it's not about biology. It's all about behavior. And this is the key. It's all about context. This verse comes from the exact same chapter as the quote that started this whole thing. The author, John, literally tells us what he means by children of the devil just 2 verses earlier. He says it's anyone who does not practice righteousness and doesn't love their brother. It's a metaphor for your moral character, not a statement about who your dad is. So, with that context, the original evidence just completely falls apart. Cain is of the evil one because his actions were evil. Simple as that. And Genesis 4, verse 25 just seals the deal. When the text says, "And Adam knew his wife again," that little word again is doing all the work. It confirms he's the father of the next kid, Seth, which reinforces that, yeah, he was the father of the first one too.
So at this point, you're probably thinking, okay, interesting bit of ancient trivia, but who cares? Well, this isn't just some dusty old academic debate. This invented doctrine has a really dark and dangerous modern legacy. This is why it matters so much. This fringe idea, born from a medieval rewrite of the Bible, has been picked up and used by hate groups for centuries. They use it to create a theological excuse for racism and anti-Semitism, arguing that some groups of people are descended from a so-called satanic race, and because of that, are somehow less than human.
And you can see how it happens, right? The path is chillingly simple. First, someone alters an ancient text to create a new radical idea. Then, that idea is used to argue that an entire group of people aren't really human, that they're descended from evil. And finally, that twisted logic is given a false stamp of biblical approval to justify pure, unadulterated hate.
So, back to our original question. Was Cain the son of Satan? The biblical and historical evidence says a clear and resounding no. The idea was invented, whole cloth, over a millennium after the original texts were written. But the story of this idea is a powerful and, frankly, a scary reminder of how an ancient piece of fiction can be twisted and weaponized to fuel very real and very modern hate.